This is Mindy Tarquini, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Hahn,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Mindy Tarquini.
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have my friend Mindy Tarquini back on the show with me. She was on last year to talk about her new book, The Infinite Now. And you guys, if you have not read The Infinite Now, and you should, you need to stop what you're doing and go pick up that book. It's one of those books that when you read it, it grabs hold of you and lingers. And you book lovers, I think you'll know what I mean by that. Like the characters just don't want to let go, and when you're finished with it, you walk around, living in this world again. And what a great concept for a book. And Mindy was with us, like I said, last year, and we talked about that book, and there's a link to that episode in the show notes because I want you guys to go back and listen to that as well as this one. But Mindy is back to talk to us because she has a brand new book called Deepest Blue. And in typical Mindy Tarquini fashion, this book is much the same in the way it invades your mind and heart. Mindy, thank you so much for coming back on the show today.
Oh, Hank, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. We normally start with the question of, what's your first memory of wanting to be a writer, but we covered that last time. So what have you been up to in this past year since we talked about The Infinite Now, and what's going on with you?
Well, I've been writing like a maniac. As you can tell, I just have a new book that just came out. I did a lot of new things this last year. I did pick up a couple of awards for Infinite Now, and I got to be a panelist at the Tucson Book Festival. And that was an amazing experience. I enjoyed it so much, and I did 3 panels, and I was like this little kid in a candy shop the whole time I was there. I was just on all the panels with these amazing writers. It was a lovely, wonderful experience. And that's pretty much it. And been writing like crazy, editing and, following that whole schedule, that whole thing that starts to happen when you start to publish.
You talked about getting some awards for The Infinite Now. What, as a writer that had been, telling stories for as long as you have, and we talked last time about the build up to this point. What is that like when not only people start reading the book, but your peers and industry people start, taking notice and then sharing, their thoughts with you in that way?
It's always, maybe big New York Times bestseller people, this is not, what their experience is because they're used to it. I don't know. For me, I think of myself as this, lady who sits in her office or whatever, and I type out on my laptop all day. I don't really think ever. It's going to sound terrible. I don't ever really think in terms of people are actually reading this. So it's always a surprise to me, like, oh, you read it? you liked it? So getting an award is just, it's always like this amazing thing because they don't know me. They have no reason to be nice to me. They just read it out of a lot of different books and said, this one deserves the honor. So I can't even tell you what it feels like. It is surreal. It's surreal. I don't know any better way to put it. And if there's any other writers out there, who are kind of, starting out and working their way through, it's really humbling. I don't know how to put that. Kind of makes you think, wow, can I pull that off again?
Right. Well, I think a lot of people understand that sentiment that you're talking about, that writing is this weird thing where you have to have a certain confidence that what you write is going to be good, or and maybe you don't even think of it in that way as a writer. You think of it as, I have a story to tell. These are characters. These are situations that need to be told. They need to be put out in the world. And whether it's good or not, is not necessarily, something that you think about, but it's something that you have to do. And on some level, you feel like that this is something that needs to be out there. But then at the same time, when you're doing the work, you kind of have to assume that you're the only person that's going to read it, because that would be crippling to just know that, that this is going to be out there in front of the entire world. And then someone's going to read it and they're going to start talking about it. And then this attention is going to come to it from people I don't know. It's just going to get weird, So I think you have to segment that, don't you?
Yeah. And people are going to be asking questions, and, writing is a very personal business. You put your heart on a page and you send it out there. And if a reviewer is not thrilled with what your heart has presented, you have to not take it personally, or not, just sort of go with the flow on it and say, okay, well, this book wasn't their cookie. Not a problem. Move along, because it might be somebody else's cookie. So when I write, I do think about the reader. I do think in terms of, will the reader understand this? Will the reader appreciate this? Will this delight the reader? But I have to really dig down deep. What is the story I'm trying to tell? What am I trying to put out there? And not every reader is going to love it. Some may hate it. There may be a lot who hate it. What do I know? But that I'm talking to a specific reader, and I do have that person in my mind. So when I write, I always try to think of who's sitting across from me at the table that I'm trying to tell the story to.
Right.
We're pouring coffee, we're having a beer. What am I trying to tell this person and get across to them? And that keeps me grounded. That kind of keeps me, is this story making sense? Am I getting my point across? Does it mean something to somebody someday, one hopes?
Sure. I have a weird question for you. And this is something I was thinking about when I went back and reviewed over our last conversation, so that I would, just to bring what we talked about back to, fresh in my mind. You had this fascinating story about this situation you were dealing with, where this debilitating pain, and out of that pain and that struggle, you began writing, and it was sort of born out of that, and writing became your escape, and you eventually were able to overcome that. Now that you are writing, you're putting out a novel every year, and you're not dealing with that level of pain that you were before. Does the creative process come as easily to you now as it did then? And I know that that's bizarre, but sometimes out of when we're writing to get away from something or to deal with something, it becomes that whole escape becomes part of the creative process. Do you ever think of that, or does it affect the way you think about writing at all?
Yes. When I had just this enormous back issue, which, is something I still deal with all the time, but, we found a treatment at work. So yay, knock on wood. Most of the time I'm fine. Most of the time I do pretty well, and I'm not, I'm not going through that same level of pain at all that I was going through when I first started writing. I someday people are going to see all the books that came out of that time period. I know I talked about The Million Word Wonder, and actually Deepest Blue is a book that originated during that time period. It does not change. There are other kinds of pain besides physical pain. And I think Infinite Now and Deepest Blue certainly came out of a more emotional spot than maybe Hindsight did, or maybe some of those earlier, yay, kids, let's write a book kind of era. Even the books I wrote back then under that have changed. The ones that I hope to bring out in coming years have changed as a result of that switch over. So, if I could take back that physical pain and give back, like if I could claim the physical pain and give back the emotional pain, I'd do it in a minute.
Oh, yeah.
In a New York minute.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
We also talked about your history and your family history and how these myths and legends and just the things that are brought to this modern world from our family and our ancestors, and all those things start to inform the stories that we tell, and maybe the things that we draw upon, and some of the characters that invade our stories. Tell me about Deepest Blue. This is this follows a lot in the vein of The Infinite Now, but this is a very different story. But this has a very Neil Gaiman-ish vibe when I read it. Where'd this story come from, and tell us about the characters?
Okay, this story has such a history. Again, during that time period when I was first starting to write, I'd written The Million Word Wonder, and nobody was interested. They will be someday. They're going to love this. They will love this book. Is this before? I think it was this before I wrote Hindsight.
Okay.
And I had met this Southern gal who is now my best friend, critique partner person. And, we had decided we're going to be serious about writing. We're going to write a book in 3 months. We were going to write a book. It was a challenge. Okay. So I would go to her house and I'd bring my kids, and we sat down and we wrote, for hours, and we only had 3 months to do it. And the original version of this story was like this Italian medieval soap opera. It was like I was channeling As the World Turns for the Renaissance.
Oh, that's amazing.
And was nothing like what it turned out to be. I looked at the original a couple of months ago, and I thought, except for the character names, I don't think I would at all have said, oh, of course, what resulted came from this. But that's what I had done. And I zipped through this thing in 3 months, and it was very large, and it was full of turned around language and lots of ye olde stuff happening. And I sent it off to agents, and nobody fell at my feet. I did not understand that, because it was tragic and it was real, and there was all this emotion, and these terrible things were happening, and people were having sex with whom, about what. It was a totally different story from what Deepest Blue ended up becoming. And it was after that I decided to write Hindsight, which, we've talked about, that I thought was this silly little book, and, everything, it turned out differently. So what happened with Deepest Blue was, I put it under the bed. Okay. I took it to a few critique groups, and people kept saying to me, well, when is this set? And I was like, in Italy. And then they said, but where? Because I was making up town names. I was just making stuff up. And then I said, like in Italy. And then they were like, well, when is it set? And that was the kiss of death for this book with me. Like, when was it set? And I was like, medieval times. and then they were going, well, you can't do that. This is obviously historical, and you must choose a time period. And I was like thinking, oh, it's a historical. I don't write historical. Infinite now, not even a glimmer in my eye at the time. I don't write historicals. I don't want to do the research to write a historical about all the fascinating happenings going on in this book. So then I kept trying to think, well, I said, it's a once upon a time, can't people just read a story about something without having to know where it is and when it is and whatever. So I was really stymied by that question. So I started trying to do things like, it was 20 years before the plague. I tried to do that. Like, would that work? And then I tried to pick some town in Italy, and then of course I'm running into the people saying things like, well, they didn't have a Hoburg like that during that time period. And it went under the bed because I thought, I am not going to become a medieval scholar to write this book. It's not going to happen. It's too bad. Lovely story, under the bed. It can never be written because I don't have a time period for it and I don't have whatever. So under the bed it goes. And I went on with my life. And then a few years later, I pulled it out. I joined a different critique group. And I was thinking, I'm going to try something different with this one. I'm going to write it differently. And that will solve the when and where problem because I'll make it a comedy. I know. Can you believe it? I was going to make this a comedy. I'll make it a comedy. And actually, that version was funny. It was really funny. It more centered on the character Claudio, the youngest brother. And I brought it. I still look at it sometimes and laugh and think, oh, it's too bad I didn't write this version. But I took it to this new critique group, and the lady who ran it told me, well, you're not funny. So now I've got this medieval thing that is not even funny. So back under the bed it goes.
But let me interrupt you for just a second. What's interesting is that this book, what was that going down the road? This book has humor,
yes.
and it's fun. So what you're saying is that your natural writing style can be funny, but when you try to make it funny, it's just kind of overdone.
No, I don't think she had a sense of humor at all. she like shortly after kicked me out of the critique group, so I just wasn't kind of following whatever the norm was that was going on.
Who needs her?
So, yes, who needs her? But it was, I was trying to go way more slapdash, much more in more of a hindsight kind of a way, not more over the top than hindsight was. And people who want to write fan fiction, if you want a parody, go for it. It's there. So I look at it now and I laugh. I think it's like a parody fan fiction of what it ended up being. So, but back under the bed it goes. So then all the things happened that led to me publishing Hindsight. And I kept thinking during that time period when I was in the very baby stages of, oh my gosh, I'm actually going to publish a book. I have a class I take twice a year whenever this lady offers it. I'm in there. It's called Structure Safari. And it's basically a way of, running it kind of through a developmental edit, ahead of time. These are my turning points. These are my pinch points. These are the characters. This is the emotion. Here's the external threads. Here's the internal threads is what I'm trying to go for. So I brought it to that class and, I had to read the original manuscript again. And oh my God, it was this hot mess. I just looked at it and, from 10 years earlier, and I was just cringing over the overwrought language, the overwrought emotion. And I brought it into the class and I said, and I almost canceled it the next day because it was that bad. I had to set all the events. When I really read it, I realized this thing jumps back and forth in time. It jumps back and forth in point of view, sometimes in the same paragraph, the ending of the story was in the beginning. The middle of the story was at the end. It made no sense. So I sat in this class and I thought, well, I'm going to do this. So I pulled the whole thing apart and I tried to put it out in a linear fashion. and just realized I had enormous sections of structure that just weren't there. I had these subplots that, were taking over the narrative that really weren't part of the narrative. And what I realized most was I had the bones of a good story. This is a family saga, and I had the bones of a good story, but what I had written needed to go. It had to go totally. So I ran it through this structure class, and I came out at the end with a good workable outline. But I put it aside because I wasn't ready for it yet. I was working on hindsight. I was just starting to work on Infinite Now, like try to get a draft out of that. And I think we had talked about, like, how did I decide what the second book was going to be? Because I had, several going, and I was just trying to decide among them. And this one was one of those to decide about, but I wasn't really ready to do anything with it. So I went through, and I did hindsight. I published Infinite Now, and I didn't yet have a setting for Deepest Blow still, even though I'd redone the whole thing. And this was before I published Hindsight. We were on our way to San Diego. And I'm, for some reason, Deepest Blue kept popping into my head. And I'm chatting to him. And I'm like, I just reread Italo Calvino's The Baron in the Trees. Do you know the story of The Baron in the Trees?
Yeah.
Yeah, he gets, this young baron from the 1700s. He gets mad at his dad. They're at the dinner table. He doesn't want to eat the mushrooms. And his father, the baron, wants him to eat the mushrooms. And I'm not going to eat those mushrooms. And the story's told from the viewpoint of the little brother, who's kind of watching all this in fascination because he's never seen anybody defy his father before. And the younger brother's going, well, I'm not eating the mushrooms. And he gets up from the table, he goes out to the garden, he climbs the tree, and he says, I am never coming down from this tree again. And he never did. He lives his entire life in that tree because he had a fight with his father over mushrooms. So I was telling my father about it because to me that book is so Italian. That's what they do. Like,
I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah, I am never going to back down from what I just said. And then I was also I love Italo Calvino. He had written that, have you ever read his Cosmic Comics? That's basically 12 little stories. They're all based in science, and he puts them all in an imaginative world. And I thought, he wrote a fairy tale. Maybe I can write a fairy tale. It was like out of this bolt of lightning that everything suddenly started. So there I am on my phone while my husband's driving, Googling Italian fairy tales, Italian folklore, Italian whatever. And I found out all this information on it. And, I was like, oh, this could work. And one of the pieces of information I found was their favorite color was indigo. And gosh, what's the title of my book? Deepest Blue. And right then it was settled. Now I had a setting, and now I had a place. But I still didn't have what I actually wanted to write about, what, like, my story was going to be about. Can we take a break here for a second, Hal? So sorry, just break for 1 second, sorry. You edit this out, right? That part?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I looked at the last interview and it's like, there's one part where I said, oh gosh, I'm going to need another edit here, and it's still in there. And I'm like, oh God, don't say that once through the entire interview. So, okay. I'll take the second one then. Okay, we can go back now. Okay, so back when I was writing Infinite Now, I was telling you that I was writing, it was like a story of my family had been born out of, ancient tragedy in my family. And I had gone back in with it, and I thought, like, that was the story that would explain how I feel about life and about death and about, taking advantage of every moment in your time, in your life, like this Infinite Now. That's all you all you ever have. And here I'd written hindsight, basically the hindsight was, live this life like it's the only one you get. So I had written Infinite Now because I'd suffered a loss, a really terrible loss, and kind of loss that no family should ever have to suffer. And I thought it was all there in Infinite Now, that I had done what I was going to do, and my next book was going to be lighter, and it was going to be back to laughter. I had said what I needed to say about love and about loss. But I wasn't really ready yet. Having suffered such a grief, and it was like greater than a grief anybody ever has to suffer. I couldn't get Deepest Blue out of my mind. So while I was putting the finishing touches on Infinite Now, it kept popping up, and I was in Italy at the time, and kind of walking those ancient roads and thinking about it. So when I sent in Infinite Now to my editor, I immediately opened Deepest Blue. And I looked at the outline I had written, and I looked at the words I had written that needed to go. And I looked at the book with new eyes. And something I hadn't noticed in all the iterations of this book I had tried, the Italian soap opera, the comedy version, and now this new outline I had finally decided on that now had a setting, a fairy tale set in Italy someplace in some way. I realized that the core of the story was about grief. And I just hadn't noticed it and all of that. And it was sort of interesting to me that you can write things into your stories that you don't even realize you've written into your stories. And I thought, this is not about a soap opera between brothers. This is a love letter between siblings. And it's a story about the struggle of those who survive in the wake of unspeakable loss. So I looked at it with new eyes, and I thought it's not about like they're struggling, this is about a family who was close, and they thought like their destinies were set and their stars were on the rise and everything was just going to be wonderful from there on in. And then they have this big event that happens, and they're sent into a spiral from which they struggle every single day to write. Like their world tilts, their course is going a wobble, and every day they're struggling to put that course back on track. And I think even at the very end of the book that protagonist is still working on it. Like, this is something he's just going to be working on for the rest of his life. But as I read the book again, I thought, this isn't a story about outside. It's not a story about events that drove the brothers. This is a story about the emotion that makes up the architecture of their lives. So it's a story about inside. And that's when I knew I truly found my setting, that this was a story that was taking place inside and not outside. And I started writing like a crazy woman at that point.
What's funny, Mindy, is that when you think, when there's a thread running through your stories, and you think, okay, I said everything I need to say about this particular topic or this emotion or this family situation. I've said everything I need to say about it. I'm going to move on to something else. And by God, if things don't just pop up again and again and again, don't they?
Yes, they do. And this was literally, if you read the dedication, it says right there in the dedication to the book who this book is for or what this book is about. And my hope as I wrote it was to, I hope it will resonate. It should resonate with people on a lot of levels. Everybody has suffered loss at some point. Everybody understands that need to go on. And Meghan McCain tweeted the other day, she said that, the death of John McCain's daughter, the death of a beloved is like an amputation. And she had a screenshot of the cell phone that says dad, oh gosh, I lost it when I saw that. And I thought, she's holding back. It's worse. It's so much worse than that. We're not really in a society. We're allowed to express that. Everybody has to, you're supposed to move on. You're supposed to process it and get better and whatever. But, when that loss is reversed, when it's in the wrong order, when it's not the typical progression, it's unexpected, it's a breathtaking agony. And what I hoped with this book, that those who have suffered that loss will recognize themselves in these pages, that they will recognize the situation, and that they'll draw hope and strength and, give themselves permission to move past the pain as much as they're able to, and to give their stars permission to rise again. So that's what Deepest Blue was about.
We've really lost our ability to mourn, haven't we?
We have. We
just societally, we don't put much emphasis there anymore.
We keep it inside. We move right along. When somebody passes, it's a deeply personal thing when it happens. And, if it's not an expected passing, when a person loses a sibling or they lose a child, it's outside what's expected. When a young person dies, it's outside what we expect to have happen. And, people draw back. They withdraw because it's almost like, is it catching? Could that happen to me? Because it's your worst fear. It's everybody's worst fear is made manifest with the grieving person. And I'm not saying like the people, were nice, they were lovely, but they don't know what to say. And that's fine, because I don't know what to say either. Nobody knows what to say. And we don't give people that space to mourn, to deal with it. There are wonderful support groups out there. I found one right away. My family found one right away. It was very helpful. And I encourage people to not wait, to immediately, find that kind of help. Because, when things are in a reverse order, when it's a different kind of death or whatever, you're in a unique club and you need some unique help with it.
Well, and I think that's why books, fiction especially, are so important in a time like this, because because we don't know what to say to one another most of the time, and even though we find great support systems and groups, they can't be there all the time. But you can settle in with a book like this, and it can communicate on a deep level, and while not fixing the situation, can allow us to vicariously grieve through character sometimes, can help us to see how these relationships work out, and in some strange way they kind of become part of us and part of our healing process.
Yes, well, that's what I think story is about. I think when we pick up a story and if something resonates, like you talked about with Infinite Now, that it's, those characters kind of follow you around. They kind of talk to you because something in it resonated with you. Something that, and I always go back to this Italo Calvino book, The Baron and the Trees. I have a few books that I find myself constantly going back to and thinking about. And I always wonder, well, why? What's in that character? What's in that story that I felt like it was just about written for me? like wrote the story, send it direct mail to Mindy. Here you go. And then it follows me around. I can't get the picture of that kid up in the tree. Having children of my own, I thought, oh gosh, I recognize this kid. I get it. This thing. So I think that's what story does. When you pick up a story, it may not be your cookie at all, ever. And it may not be your cookie for that moment. It may be the one, and I feel bad for anybody who ever has to pick this up and think, this is my story. I feel so bad for them. But I hope that they draw hope from it. And that's that's what the story is about. It's for all of them, and it's in the description, the dedication that the story is for them. Which is not to mean that the rest of you can't read it and enjoy it.
Well, and not to give people the completely wrong impression. You know, we've talked a lot about grief and mourning and healing and these familial relationships, but that's not all this book is. This is actually a very entertaining read, and in a very once upon a time kind of way. And even though you hit some really deep notes here, it's a fantastic read. It's a really entertaining book that anyone can get great enjoyment from. And then there are some of us that I think are going to get a little deeper meaning from. It's a great book regardless.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I did. I try, it's a very real thing. Life is very funny. Even if terrible things and horrible things happen, life is funny, and relationships between siblings can be hysterical.
And sometimes when it's the hardest is when it's the funniest.
Yes, and it's the sort of the interactions between the two, between the three of them, the way they interact with each other, the way they talk to each other, the stuff they just throw out there. You don't throw stuff like that out with a stranger, but you'll do it with your brother or your sister.
Right.
And not worry too much about the fallout that results. So yes, I did. I wrote it. It was very true to heart to me of how people and it's not just about grief. There's tons of story in there that does not specifically apply to it, but there's a lot of funny interactions. It is meant to be entertaining, even just in dealing with their dad or their parents, the back and the forth between them and the parents. And, I'm not supposed to spoil things when I get in there with stuff, but Matteo's attitude towards Claudio and his attitude toward his brother, and then Claudio's attitude toward Antonio, and then his attitude towards Matteo, and then Antonio's attitude toward both of them too. It's no wonder that these three were not communicating, because they were each living in their own little world with their own little concept of what the others were trying to do. And is that not like that in real life?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Mindy, are you, when a story like this comes to you, are these things that have been with you for a while, maybe pieces of another project? Does something ever just come completely out of left field and something you've never thought about before? Or are all of these things like I have 100 pieces of ideas all the time, and sometimes a couple of them coalesce, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is where that thing finally goes. But every now and then something just hits you in the side of the head from nowhere. What is it like for you when things come to you?
Like particularly in, say, with Deepest Blue, the things that are hitting me?
Yeah.
Well, the idea of this outside and inside did come out of the blue. And I described that in the first two paragraphs of the novel. And, more literary types, when they finally finish the novel, maybe going, oh, this is more an emotional journey than an external journey. And how sublime that she did this. I wanted to do this idea of a story that was divorced from our real world in a place that looks like Happy Land. And it really does. Doesn't it look like Happy Land? The sprites are delivering messages for spun sugar treats, and everybody's so happy and nobody worries about anything. I realized that most of the advice that everybody was giving to each other was like, let's talk about this tomorrow. Or we'll deal with it next week. Like that was everybody's solution to everything when it got really bad. It's, we'll talk about this later. And then I thought, well, because I think in real life, that's what happens is it becomes too overwhelming at the moment. Or if there's a big crisis, it's really difficult. And a lot of the time it won't hurt to wait until next week, until everybody's emotions have calmed down, until everybody's having time to be clear thinking. So that was a lot of fun for me when I did this freedom from real life. That I could make this a totally different culture. I could make this a culture where, you know, they didn't feel this need to remember, to write histories, to whatever. They always kept their faces forward. They were always moving into the future. And for this family, the conflict comes from their inability to move into the future. And they're the rulers of this land. They're supposed to be the ones who are able to show everybody else how to do it. And they're unable to. And that's where all the conflict is arising. It's from that trying very hard to, you know, I need to move forward, but I'm trying to hang on to the past. And then finding that medium, that place where they're able to. So that struck me as different, because I tend to look to the past for a lot of my inspiration, and that hit me like a bolt out of the blue. Wouldn't it be interesting to have this world where they don't feel all mired in the backstory and in the past, and they want to move forward? So I thought that was a different aspect. I don't know. What did you think? Did you think so?
Yeah. I love that, that it's, that these are characters that I can relate to, and that it's a story that I fall into, and it's a little escapist, and it's a little real, and it's just one of those stories that's just kind of its own thing. And I love it. I absolutely love it.
Well, the past is very heavy. You know, if you have to drag that with you all the time, and, you know, we have these jokes about, you know, Italian mourners. When you meet, I think Italians like really mourn well. They just mourn to the nth degree. When you meet those ladies, they're not around so much anymore, but, you know, the old Italian ladies that are in black from head to toe. Right. And their husbands died 50 years ago. You know, but they're still in black from head to toe, and they still talk about him like he just went out that morning to get milk. Right. And he didn't return, you know, and I made that kind of part of the story, you know, like the one character, the protag, that's how he discusses, you know, the person who dies, you know, is like he just walked out and he's waiting for him to come back and do whatever. But this is, they just mourn, you know, forever. So many of them never remarry because it's just not done. I had my husband, I had my time, and now the rest of my life I must wear black, and I must be very sorry about that this ever happened. And like, boy, that's a heck of a weight to have to drag behind you, you know, for the rest of your life. And I honestly don't think that the dead want you to do that. I don't think that's what they want from their perspective on the other side. And obviously we can't do that, or we would never move forward. We would never have children. We would never, you know, look to the future for anything. So the book, I'm trying to tell people it's okay to let it go. It's okay to lay that burden down. You don't have to hang on to it forever. You can just go ahead and move on. You'll see them at the end. It's okay. It's okay.
Exactly. And I think that puts a point on it. It's okay. And life is full of ups and downs, and there are appropriate times and seasons for things. But then there's also the season to move on and to live life after that. And what a beautiful story. Mindy, I love the book. Deepest Blue is out everywhere now. When people are hearing this, we're going to have links to it in the show notes. If people are just finding out about you, where can they find you online, Mindy?
Well, at my website, mindytarquini.com. My hobby is redoing my website. I just redid it again. So go there, and then go to my Facebook page at Mindy Tarquini Author and say, you did a great job on the website there. Thank you. I am on Twitter. If you go there, you'll mostly just see me ranting at my congressmen and my senators. If you, there is an Instagram, and I think last time I was talking about how sad my Instagram is. It's still sad. But I'm hopeful.
But you're doing better. You're doing better, though.
You think I am with the Instagram?
Yeah,
At least, I'm trying. I'm going to learn this because I really like Instagram. Like, I like looking at other people's things on Instagram.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of a visual person, so yes, I'm going to try it. I'm going to go back to it.
Just post more than once or twice a year, and it'll get better.
Did you check out my Instagram?
I'm just teasing, Mindy. I'm just teasing.
Well, they have that thing you're supposed to take the picture right then and put it on. It's Instagram, but I know people aren't. They're doing whole setups, and then I found out there was a way to put photos that were already done on there. But again, I am a techno adult, and I will probably need to take a class to figure out how to do this. But thank you.
Well, Mindy, we wish you much luck on the new book, Deepest Blue. I love it. I'm going to send everybody to pick up a copy of it. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Jason and Joey took their food trays outside and sat high above the parking lot on the secluded stairwell that had become their lunchtime hangout, picking at their Thanksgiving specials and swapping updates. They were almost finished eating before Jason managed to screw up the courage to say what he needed to. "I want to apologize." Joey looked puzzled. "What the hell for?" "Because your coma was my fault." "Yours? The horseman beamed me, you didn't." "Hey, want to see something cool? Look what I found on my phone." Joey produced the device, hit a few buttons, and swiped his finger. An orange circle hung in a field of black, overexposed, something that had been moving fast when the flash caught it. "I was trying to get his picture, right? Like an idiot? Well, I didn't get him, but that is the pumpkin he threw at me." Jason stared at the blurry orange shape for a long time. "Cool. Cool? Can you imagine if we actually got a picture of the headless horseman? We'd be famous by now." He pocketed the phone. "Hey, do you want the rest of this turkey? It looks like bologna." "Tastes like bologna, too." He speared the slice anyway. "Look, this is going to sound weird, but I think I made you a target." "What do you mean?" "I made you a target by telling you about my gift. It's some sort of magical rule. If we reveal ourselves to a normal person, whoever we tell becomes a target for ghosts. And usually, they die." "And you told me anyway?" "No, I'd already told you. There was no way to untell you. Don't be mad. It all worked out, right? Right?" Joey's expression had darkened. "Give me a second here. And there's a bright side." "What bright side?" "Now you'll have a gift, too." "Me?" "That's what your coma was. Some kind of transition. You got targeted, but you survived. You'll be a founder now, like Ichabod. You'll pass your gift to your kids like he passed his to me." Joey looked worried. "What kind of gift will I get?" "People get gifts that complement their natural abilities. It could be anything." "Anything? So, I could read minds?" "I guess." "Turn purple and levitate?" "Probably not. Something that expresses the essential you." "Then I'll have an actor's gift. What's an actor's gift?" Jason shrugged. "Super narcissism? Shut up. So you're not mad?" Joey was shaking with excitement. "Mad? This is the coolest thing ever! We'll be like the dynamic duo, fighting supernatural foes up and down the eastern seaboard." Jason laughed, feeling epic relief. "I thought you'd be pissed." "Nah. What's a little coma between friends?" He took a bite out of a Nutter Butter, grinning madly. "I'm going to be a superhero." "But you can't tell anyone." "Why not? Weren't you listening? Everyone we tell dies. You can't talk about your gift to anybody." But if they were targeted and lived, we could have our own X-Men. Yeah, or all your friends could die. Do you want to risk that? No, I guess not. But I don't do closets very well, you know? I came out at conception. Promise to keep it to yourself. Yeah. Joey shifted sideways and walked his sneakers up the brick. So, the essential me. Ooh, I know what gift I'll get. I'll get a singer's gift. What's a singer's gift? Jason shrugged. Superhuman drug tolerance? Shut up!